Hello. My name is Jeremy Houck, and I'd like to thank you for making the choice to join us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. I wonder as we get started today, have you ever had a conversation that just kind of sticks in your mind? Not an argument, not a fight, just a few ordinary comments that somehow lodge themselves in your brain and they refuse to leave. You find yourself thinking about that conversation in your car or in the shower or 2 a.m. in the morning when you should really be asleep. A few months ago, I was talking to this guy in the gym, and he found out that I was a minister. And so he said, honestly, I used to go to church. I've probably sat through hundreds of sermons. I've sung thousands of songs. And well, one day I just kind of asked myself, is it making any real difference in my life? I mean, not Sunday morning, I've got somewhere to be different, but like actually different. And my answer was no, so I quit going. I mean, life's too short to keep doing something that's not working. I've been thinking about that conversation ever since. Not because I think he was right, but because I can't shake the possibility that he was more right than I want to admit. And not just about himself, but about us and about me. I wonder if you've gone and sat in a church for months or years and heard hundreds of sermons and sang thousands of songs, and you don't really feel like it's made any impact in your life at all. Maybe you go to church because your parents or your wife or your husband make you go. Maybe you go because, you've always gone to church. Or maybe you go because you like the social aspect. All your friends go to church there. And so you're very content going 1, 2, or 3 times a month, but you don't really see a difference in your life. It doesn't matter if you're there or not. Last week, we began looking at the parable of the sower, and Jesus makes one thing unmistakably clear. The seed is consistent. The farmer doesn't change. The only thing that determines whether there is a harvest or not is, the condition of the soil. Which means it's not the preacher's fault when there is no growth, as much as we all like to blame the preacher, right? It also means that it's not the text when I'm not growing, because I know that I've heard some of these stories and passages so many times that I could recite them in my sleep, but that's not the problem either. According to Jesus, the problem is what's happening below the surface. I know usually we go to this parable and we say, okay, this is going to be our personality test, right? So which soil are you? And most people, being optimistic, put themselves down as the good soil and we don't really think about it. But as I mentioned last week, I think that we are all 4 soils at different points and different times in our lives. There are places where your life that's packed down and the word bounces right off. You've heard it 100 times and it's never really made an impact. And there are other places where there's growth and wilt. And then there are places of tremendous growth. Today, I want us to focus on the second soil, the rocky soil. And here's what gets me about the rocky ground. Man, it looks so good at first. Jesus doesn't describe it as cold or hostile or indifferent. This isn't the hard path where nothing gets in. This soil actually responds. The seed goes in and something happens. There's visual, measurable, exciting growth. There's enthusiasm. There's life. And everybody looks at it and says, look, something's happening. The problem is it doesn't last. When the emotions wear off, when some difficulty arrives, the growth withers. When we get the divorce papers or the addiction finally costs us everything, or we get a horrible diagnosis. In those moments, we turn to God with an urgency and a desperation, but it's just for a season. For a moment, we're in the Word every day. We're meditating, we're praying, we're at every service, we're fasting, and then slowly the crisis fades and so does our faith. The rocky ground person has enthusiasm without endurance and excitement without depth. And if I'm being honest with you, I've been that person more than once. I don't know how many times that I've gone to God in prayer, pledging my undying love, and I meant every word that I prayed. I've I've started prayer journals with the best of intentions. I've decided I was going to read through the Bible in a year. I've made these emotional commitments that, well, they just didn't last when life got hard. So today I'm not throwing stones, I'm actually confessing. And I feel free to confess this based on the fact that Jesus tells a parable about it, which means it's not a me problem. This is not a problem that's unique to a few unusually weak people. This is a human problem. Maybe the most common spiritual problem we face. And that's not because we're weak-willed. I just think we're living in a culture that's almost perfectly engineered to produce shallow roots. I mean, think about our world. We live in the age of the transformation story. Social media has created an entire economy built around the dramatic before and after moments. The sobriety anniversary post, the weight loss photo, the finally I got out of that toxic relationship post. And those posts get thousands of likes and shares and comments. They're celebrated, they're rewarded. But you know what never gets celebrated? The fact that Tuesday morning you got up at 6 a.m. and read 2 chapters of a minor prophet. You didn't really understand what you were reading, but you still got up and got out your Bible and you read because you believe there's value in reading the text. There's no Instagram moment for ordinary faithfulness. Nobody goes viral for being consistent. We've been unconsciously trained to value the dramatic moment over the slow process. We want microwave spirituality in a slow cooker world. We forget that authentic and healthy spiritual growth happens over time. It's slow, constant, gradual. We've lost our ability to appreciate spiritual dryness. We've somehow come to believe that if the worship feels flat, if prayer feels like it's just talking to the ceiling, if the Bible feels like you're reading the phone book, then something has to be wrong with you, with the church, with the preacher, with God. But the Bible's filled with men and women who would tell you something completely different. They would say those dry seasons are not the absence of God. They're the presence of God doing the deepest work. Here's what I've observed. When somebody undergoes a sudden change, a dramatic change, more often than not, it's about manipulation and not transformation. I don't know, maybe they're bargaining with God. Maybe they're trying to cut a deal with a friend or family. Maybe they're trying to prove something to themselves. And if that's the reason behind their mad dash to God, you can be sure that the wilting will come just as fast as the growth. Jesus explains it in verses 16 and 17. The seed on the rocky soil represents those who hear the message and immediately receive it with joy. But since they don't have deep roots, they don't last long. They fall away as soon as they have problems or are persecuted for believing God's word. Did you notice that Jesus doesn't name the rocks? I think that's intentional because the rocks are different for each and every one of us. But I do believe that we have some common ones that I want to call your attention to. And as we go through these rocks, I want you to be honest with yourself, and not the kind of honest you are if somebody's watching. I mean, actually honest. Because it's not hard to fool me. It's not hard to fool the people around you, but you can never fool God. He already knows exactly what's going on in your soil. And so sometimes we have to deal with the rock of impatience. We become deeply allergic to waiting. We live in a world where we can get almost anything we want within 24 hours. Food can be delivered in 30 minutes. We can stream a movie in seconds. The answer to any question that you have can be on your phone in a millisecond. We've eliminated waiting from almost every area of modern life. And unfortunately, we bring that same expectation to our spiritual formation, and then we wonder, why are we stuck? You see, God's not slow because he's inefficient. God is slow because he's building something that has to last. Sometimes we struggle with the rock of shallowness. We bought into this form of Christianity that's all about how we feel rather than what we know and who we're becoming. We chase experiences instead of transformation. We want that mountaintop without the valley. We'd rather have the resurrection and never endure the cross. A tree doesn't grow its root system in response to good weather. It grows its root system in response to stress. When the soil gets dry and the tree needs water, the roots grow down deeper looking for nourishment. The same is true for us. Sometimes it's the rock of priorities. We say we want to grow spiritually, but our calendars tell a completely different story. Your calendar is the most honest document you own. It doesn't tell what you say you value, it tells what you actually value. And for many of us, if we're honest, spiritual depth just doesn't make the cut. It gets the scraps and the margins. It gets the 5 minutes before bed when I'm already half asleep, and we say that we want to go deep, and then our schedule makes it look like depth is optional. There's an old adage that says, show me your checkbook and your calendar and I'll show you your God. Most of us already know who our God really is. The question is, are we willing to do anything about it? Sometimes we have to deal with the rocks of distraction. We live in a world designed to keep us on the surface, notifications pinging, feeds scrolling, messages coming in. We're always connected, but we're never grounded. The sad result of always being distracted is that God gets our leftover attention, and then we wonder, why is our faith so weak? Some of us have to deal with the rocks of comfort. We want just enough Jesus to feel better about ourselves, but not so much Jesus that it actually costs us something. We want blessings without obedience, grace without transformation. Dietrich Bonhoeffer coined the phrase cheap grace. He believed it was the most dangerous thing that would ever attack the church. Cheap grace looks like this. I want enough Jesus to feel forgiven, but not so much Jesus that he starts telling me what to do with my time and my money. I want the peace that passes all understanding, but I'm not interested in the peace that requires me to forgive someone who I don't really think deserves my forgiveness. I want the comfort of knowing that I'm going to heaven, but I just don't want to think too hard about what I'm supposed to be doing while I'm still living here on earth. We've built an entire consumer model out of Christianity, and it's based on the impulse. We come when it's convenient. We leave when it's not. We take what is helpful. We ignore what is hard. And if this church stops making you feel good about yourself, just go to the one down the street. They'll work harder to make you comfortable. But where in the Bible does Jesus offer comfort? He offers transformation, and there's a significant difference between the two. Sometimes we have to deal with the rock of hidden wounds. Past hurts, betrayals, disappointments create hard layers on our hearts. Now, we're excited about God's love in theory, but when it comes to actually trusting with our pain to forgive as we've been forgiven, to be vulnerable again, we hit bedrock. You can't deal with the rock that you're pretending is not there. I mean, there's a difference between carrying a wound and being defined by it. And I think some of us have been carrying our wounds for so long that we've stopped noticing how much it costs. Sometimes we have to deal with the rock that is the fear of man. And I'm afraid this rock is quietly doing enormous damage to the spiritual lives of an entire generation. I mean, we live in the most socially monitored era in human history. Every opinion is shared, every position taken, every choice made. It's now potentially visible to thousands of people. And the social pressure that creates is unlike anything our world has ever had to navigate before. So many Christians have quietly allowed that pressure to reshape what they believe, or at least what they're willing to say they believe out loud. We soften the edges. We avoid the topics that might cost us a friendship or a following. We stay silent when we should speak, and we speak carefully when we should speak plainly. We're doing nothing more but performing for a crowd, and then we wonder, why does our faith feel so hollow? When your faith is primarily about managing your image, you'll never grow deep. We're quick to change the way that we act because we don't want to disappoint other people. We'll do whatever we need to do. We'll make every compromise that we can so that we can fit into the right group, because it's all about appearances. And that's why we'll never take the time to get below the surface. Deep faith requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires risk, and risk is the one thing that image management will never allow. Sometimes we have to deal with the sin of unconfessed sin. There's a pattern in our lives we haven't surrendered, an addiction that we're managing instead of healing, a relationship that we know is toxic, we just won't let go of it. We nurse grudges, we create layers of rock that the roots of faith can't break through. And then there are times, and I'm afraid this is the biggest rock that we deal with, but we struggle with familiarity. Jesus says the seed is the word, and some of you have been reading the word for 10, 30, 50 years and you've never changed. And I'm not trying to be harsh. I just think we need to be completely honest. You know how vaccines work? You introduce a weakened, inactive form of virus into the body, and the immune system builds up antibodies. And when the real virus shows up, the body recognizes it and fights it off before it can do any real damage. Vaccines are one of the most remarkable medical advances in all of human history. But I'm also afraid that's exactly what happened to many of us spiritually. We grew up in the church, we heard all the stories, we memorized the verses, we know the vocabulary, the songs. We know how to do church. And somewhere along the way, without us ever intending it, we build up this immunity to the very thing that's supposed to transform us. We hear the word and we nod. We think, yeah, I've heard that before. We take notes. We walk out and say, oh, that was a really good sermon today. We drive home and absolutely nothing happens. Not because we're bad people. It's just because the familiar has become the forgettable. Some of us have been on spiritual autopilot for years. I mean, we're in the seat, we're going through the motions, we're doing everything correctly, but we're not really there. We stopped expecting anything to happen a long time ago, so long ago that we haven't even noticed that we've stopped. The most dangerous spiritual condition isn't atheism, and it's not doubt, and it's not even outright rebellion. It's comfortable, familiar, autopilot religion that's lost all contact with the living God. Now, we all have these rocks in our lives. So here's where I want to shift, because I don't want you to just turn off the TV today or the computer with just a list of rocks. Jesus says the sun comes up and the shallow-rooted plants wither. Now, Jesus doesn't call the sun a villain. He doesn't say, oh, and then this terrible, horrible thing happens that destroys all of our good work. He just said the sun comes up. Because the sun's not our enemy. The sun's just the sun. It does what the sun does. It shows up every morning and reveals what's actually there. The same sun that softens wax will harden clay. The same heat that destroys the shallow-rooted plant nourishes a deep-rooted one. You see, the sun doesn't determine the outcome. The roots determine the outcome. So when difficulty comes, and Jesus says when, not if, the difficulty's not attacking you, it's revealing you, it's showing you the actual condition of your soil. Jesus says the sun will come in the form of a crisis that tests whether your faith is real or just emotional. I don't know, it's a diagnosis that no one saw coming, a loss that rearranges everything, a relationship that breaks in ways you didn't think possible. A call to obedience that cost you something real. A season of silence so long and so complete that you start to wonder, is anyone listening at all? The sun is coming. The only question is, what is it going to find when it arrives? Which brings us to the part of the parable that I don't want us to miss, because if we miss it, then, well, we miss the whole story. Being rocky soil is not a condemnation, it's a diagnosis. Jesus is not saying, some of you are rocky ground and that's the end of your story. He's not sorting people into categories and handing out verdicts. He's describing the condition of our hearts. And conditions can change. Soil can be restored. Rocks can be removed. Hard ground can be broken up. I want you to think about what it is to actually clear a field of rocks. It's not glamorous. You don't do it in a single afternoon. It's slow, manual, back-breaking labor. You pull out one rock and underneath it, there's another rock you got to dig up. You clear one section and you find a whole new layer that you didn't know was there. Getting the rocks out takes seasons, not days. But a field that is cleared is more fertile than a field that was always easy. You see, the process of removing the rocks and breaking up that soil creates conditions that were never there before. Some of the most faithful Christians I've ever known came from the hardest, rockiest ground imaginable. Not despite the work it took to clear the field, but because of the work that it took. But we have to be honest about our rocks. We've got to stop pretending that just because the surface looks fine, we're good, while ignoring what's underneath. You got to stop coming to church as a box to check and start showing up as someone who actually expects God to do something. You have to stop settling for this version of Christianity that asks nothing of you and start pursuing the version that changes everything about you. And you got to be willing to do the work that nobody sees in the seasons when it seems nothing's happening. Because our goal isn't to spring up quickly. Our goal is to establish deep roots that can handle the sun as well as the storms of life. I really believe that the reason so many Christians struggle with going deep is because it's just not glamorous. Other people can't see the depth being gained in our soul. No one posts hashtag doing the hard work of maturity on Instagram. Nobody gets a trophy for spending 15 minutes in prayer when you don't feel like it. Nobody applauds you for reading your Bible when you're exhausted. Nobody notices when you choose obedience over comfort in a moment when nobody else is watching. Eugene Peterson wrote about what he called a long obedience in the same direction. Not a sprint towards holiness, not a dramatic transformation, just the same faithful direction day after day for as long as it takes. Roots will only grow in the consistent, ordinary, faithful choices that nobody sees. Because Jesus isn't interested in your quick start. He doesn't want your emotional high. He wants your daily faithfulness. He doesn't want an Instagram moment. He wants your actual life. I still struggle with rocks in my own life. I wish I didn't. I really wish that I was farther along than I am, but I'm learning that the farmer is patient. He doesn't give up on the field. He keeps throwing seed on the rocky ground. He doesn't look at the field and say, well, it's a lost cause. He throws seed on it anyway because he knows something that we often forget. Today's rocky ground can be tomorrow's harvest. As we make our way to the table, I want to remind you, the table is not a trophy case for people who already have it all figured out. It's not reserved for the people who've cleared all the rocks and established deep roots. The table is the place where rocky ground people gather. The bread and the cup tell the story about our God who looked at the hardest, most resistant ground in the universe, the human heart, and didn't turn away. The communion table reminds us that the farmer has not given up on our field. He keeps throwing seed on the ground, not because he doesn't see our rocks, but because he sees his love for us and what we can become. But going to the table also comes with a warning. We have to go honestly. We can't receive what we're unwilling to need. You can't be healed of what we refuse to name. And you can't go deeper as long as you're pretending that everything on the surface is fine. So come honestly. Come with your rocks. Come with the thing that you've been managing instead of surrendering, the wound that you've been carrying instead of healing, the habit of autopilot religion that's kept you busy but not growing. Today, as we go to the table, we're being invited to come and to sit with the master gardener and to allow him to show us what's really under the soil.